He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. F. Scott Fitzgerald once said, "In the dark night of the soul, it is always 3 o'clock in the morning." There's something creepy about 3 o'clock. When you're up at 3, you feel like if the night was an ocean and you were traveling beneath it, you would be at the depth of the depths. The darkness seems complete at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it seems almost unnatural to be awake for any length of time around then. At 3 o'clock, we are at our most insecure, our most fragile, our most mortal. Death never seems very far away at 3 o'clock in the morning. We've been living in the dark night in a lot of ways. We've been living that 3 a.m. reality. Of course, we've gained some things in this time. Many of us have gained new skills, honed new talents, found strength we didn't know we had. But the darkness has been undeniable. Thousands have lost loved ones. Ways of life and livelihoods have been lost. Fear and mistrust have reared their very ugly heads. And even those of us who have found some lessons and strength in this time, well, we're all ready for 3 o'clock to pass. In the dark night of the soul, 3 o'clock feels like an eternity. The people of Isaiah, Israel, had lived 70 years of darkness, exile, imprisonment, left in the land of Babylon, where they were under the constant threat of assimilation, of losing their identity, losing the sense of who they were. But they had fought to maintain their identity. They had not succumbed to the darkness, and now they had been allowed to go home. Home to rebuild a life that, well, really, at this point, for most of them, if not all of them, they'd only heard about. Yeah, perhaps there were a few of the oldest among them who had memories of that life back home. But most only knew of the people they were supposed to be in this homeland, this promised land, from Scripture and from the stories of their elders. And Isaiah knew something. Isaiah knew that even though 3 a.m. seemed like it was passing, another kind of darkness could take its place. Have you ever noticed the remarkable difference between 3 a.m. and, say, 5 a.m. or whatever time at the end of the night in the morning when the sun cracks on the horizon of the sky? It's like a rebirth. It's a moment that fills you. It feels like resurrection. Israel, Isaiah's people, were standing at the sunrise. But Isaiah knew darkness was still a threat. Israel had been sent into exile for mistreating the poor, for mistreating the widow, taking advantage of one another, for choosing violence over love, and for mistreating the stranger among them. And the DNA of those people now standing once again at home in Israel was exactly the same as the DNA of the people God had chosen to send away. A people who had chosen darkness. Have you ever seen studies of twins who were adopted and raised apart? What those studies find out is that they're almost mirror images of each other, even though they didn't know each other. Genes are a powerful thing. And the likelihood was that these Israelites would recreate the darkness their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had chosen to live out. Isaiah didn't know anything about genes, but he knew human nature. And so Isaiah points his people to God. I do believe that we're going to get through this dark night. The question's going to be, will we be seeking the sunrise for everyone or just for ourselves? Will we use the beautiful words of our country's founding documents as our guide? Or just choose greed and power and grab for ourselves? Will we bring good news to the poor? Release to the captives? Recovery of sight to the blind? And let the oppressed go free? Because metaphorically and in reality, the poor, the captive, the blind, the oppressed, they're all with us. Or they are us right now. And if we don't take the direction of God to heart, a lot of those poor, captive, blind, and oppressed are only going to see a shimmer of light at 5:30 and then see their hopes squelched and find themselves back at 3. We need to be brave. We need to be brave. We need to love our neighbors as ourselves. We need to give when we can give and to share when we can share. We need to do these things even when we don't feel like it, because that is what God has called us to do. That is what God has anointed us to do. And that's how we move past this dark night and embrace the sunrise. God has anointed us to preach good news to the poor, and we do need to have courage to live out that word. My prayer for you, for all of us, and me too, is that we don't wake up very often at 3, and that if we do, we drift quickly back to peaceful rest. My prayer is also that we will refuse to live the darkness of that hour. Go through your days seeking the light. Watch for the opportunity to help others. Try and see beyond yourself, your own household, your own situation. Try to understand those you disagree with. Try to live the light. And you will see that's how we push past 3 a.m. and greet the sunrise. Greet the sun. Live the light. And the dark night will stay in its place.